Settle into the quietest position you can find. Let the room around you become a little less important, and allow your eyes to rest, your jaw to soften, and your breathing to move at its own unhurried pace. Tonight, we will follow water through an ancient city, from a household basin to the deep tubs of a fuller's workshop, while wool passes through patient hands and returns to the street clean, brushed, and ready to wear. Nothing in this journey needs to be remembered, and the details may drift past like pale cloth moving in a mild morning breeze. I'm the Yawning Historian, and for a while, we will walk slowly through the ordinary work of caring for clothes in the Roman world. The city was beginning to brighten, although the sun had not yet risen above the upper walls. Roof tiles held the coolness of the night. Shutters remained closed over many windows, and the stones of the street were still more gray than gold. Somewhere beyond the houses, water moved along channels and into public fountains. A cartwheel touched an uneven paving stone, then rolled onward. From a bakery came the first low sounds of preparation, and from a courtyard came the faint scrape of a wooden basin being shifted into place. Clothing in the early Roman Empire represented many kinds of labor before it ever required washing. Sheep had been tended, wool had been sorted and spun, looms had been prepared, and cloth had been measured, cut, and sewn. Linen, where it was used, had passed through its own long sequence of growing, retting, spinning, and weaving. Dyes, decorative bands, clasps, and careful stitching could add further work. A garment was therefore not a casual or disposable object. For many people, it was expected to serve for a long time, to be brushed, aired, mended, altered, passed within a household, and cleaned in ways suited to the fiber and the means of the owner. Surviving evidence is much fuller for some cities than for others. Pompeii has left unusually vivid traces because workshops, signs, paintings, and equipment remained together after the city was buried. In Rome, Ostia, and other places, inscriptions and architectural remains add fragments to the picture. These fragments do not describe every household or every province, and historians have to resist turning one well-preserved workshop into a rule for an empire. Even so, they allow a quiet reconstruction of repeated tasks, wet floors, heavy cloth, and skilled hands. In a modest home, the care of clothing could begin without any visit to a professional workshop. A tunic might be shaken outside, hung where air could pass through it, or brushed to remove dust from the street. A small mark might be treated locally rather than sending the entire garment through a demanding wash. Seams could be checked, loose threads secured, and worn edges reinforced. Linen cloth generally tolerated water and rubbing differently from wool, while dyed and decorated garments needed still more caution. The exact routine varied with region, wealth, season, water access, and the number of people available to help. The courtyard basin was an ordinary center of this domestic work. Water had to be carried from a fountain, well, cistern, or other source, sometimes over a distance that made every unnecessary change of water feel expensive. A family with servants experienced this effort differently from a family in which members carried the jars themselves. Records rarely preserve the full distribution of such tasks, but household labor was shaped by status, age, custom, and circumstance. It is safer to imagine several possible arrangements than a single Roman washday repeated behind every door. The water entered the basin with a low, hollow sound. A folded length of linen was lowered into it and pressed beneath the surface. Hands moved along the cloth rather than attacking it, opening creases, lifting one edge, and letting the water run back. A little cleanser might be used, depending on what was available and what the fabric could bear. Soap was known in parts of the ancient world, although its everyday use and form differed across time and place. Other alkaline or mineral preparations could assist with cleaning. The household scene was practical, small in scale, and close to the other duties of the day. Beyond the private doorway, professional fullers worked on a different scale and often with a different purpose. The Latin fullonica is usually translated as a fullery, yet the modern word laundry does not quite contain all that happened there. Fullers might clean worn garments, but they also finished newly woven woolen cloth. Fresh cloth from the loom could be oily, uneven, and loose in texture. Fulling helped cleanse the fibers and encourage them to interlock, giving the material a denser, more even surface. Later stages could include rinsing, stretching, brushing, trimming, whitening, and pressing. This distinction matters because a fullery was not simply a larger version of the basin at home. It belonged to the chain of textile production as well as to garment maintenance. A fuller needed knowledge of fibers, solutions, timing, pressure, and finish. Too little treatment might leave cloth rough or irregular. Too much could distort it. Dyed cloth could react differently from undyed wool. Fine material demanded another degree of attention. The work was repetitive, yet it was not mindless. By the time the street had turned pale with mourning, a workshop door might already stand open. The architecture of known Fulonicae varied, but some included built masonry tubs, basins, work areas, and arrangements for draining or moving water. Light entered from an open front or central court. The air held the mild mineral scent of wet stone and damp wool. Sandaled feet crossed surfaces made to tolerate splashes. A worker carried a bundle inward, while another bent over a basin where cloth rested below the rim. Wool behaves differently when wet. Its fibers have tiny overlapping scales, and warmth, moisture, and movement can cause them to catch together. Roman fullers did not describe this with modern microscopy, yet generations of practice revealed what repeated pressure could do. Cloth was placed into a tub with water and cleansing agents, then trodden underfoot. Images and workshop remains suggest workers standing in narrow vats, bracing themselves while stepping, pressing, and turning the material in a controlled rhythm. The motion was steady. One foot pressed down, weight shifted, and the other followed. The cloth folded beneath the heel, then loosened as it was turned. Water moved around the worker's ankles. A hand reached down to draw a heavy section upward, and the sequence began again. This was strenuous labor, but in the softened distance of our night journey, only the rhythm remains, like walking slowly in place while the city wakes beyond the wall. Fullers used alkaline substances to loosen oils and dirt. Ancient writers and later commentary mention several materials, including mineral earths, and some sources note the collection of urine for its useful chemical properties. The details of practice likely varied, and there is no need to linger over any single ingredient. What mattered to the craft was the measured effect of a solution on cloth. The material had to emerge ready for careful rinsing, with the fibers changed but not ruined. Fuller's earth, a naturally absorbent clay, could help draw grease from wool. The name used today connects the material to the craft, though ancient deposits and terminology were not uniform. Different regions had access to different earths, salts, and water. Workshops adapted to local supply. Merchants moved useful materials along roads and sea routes, but ordinary practice was often built from what lay close at hand and what experienced workers had learned to trust. After the treading came rinsing. This stage required abundant water, and the placement of a workshop could reflect access to supply and drainage, though urban arrangements were never identical. Cloth heavy with moisture was lifted, shifted, and washed again. The water clouded, was released, and was replaced. A worker might press the folded mass against the side of a basin, then allow fresh water to pass through it. Each repetition removed a little more of the cleaning mixture and whatever it had loosened. Water in a Roman city was both an engineered achievement and a daily responsibility. Aqueducts are the most visible monuments of that system, yet the last distance to a household or workshop depended on local pipes, tanks, fountains, jars, channels, and human effort. Not every building had a private connection. Public fountains could become points of routine meeting, where people waited, exchanged brief remarks, and balanced filled vessels for the journey home. The grand line of an aqueduct ended, many times over, in the ordinary weight of a container carried down a street. Inside the fullery, water also connected one task to the next. The rinsed cloth might be examined in clearer light. Fingers felt for uneven areas. A dark mark could be treated again. A fold might be reopened and passed back through a basin. Experienced judgment mattered because written recipes could never replace the look and feel of the textile itself. Cloth announced its condition through weight, smell, color, drape, and the quiet resistance it gave to the hand. Once cleaned, woolen cloth could be raised to improve its surface. Workers used brushes or plant heads suited to drawing up the nap. Teasels became famous for this purpose in later textile traditions, and plant tools with hooked structures appear to have been useful in antiquity as well, although the exact implements changed across workshops and centuries. The repeated motion lifted fibers into a soft, even layer. Light settled differently on the surface afterward, and the cloth took on a finished appearance. The raised nap could then be trimmed. Ancient representations and surviving tools suggest the use of large shears in textile work. The fuller or a specialized worker guided the blades across the surface, removing stray fibers and producing a more regular finish. The sound was gentle and metallic, a measured opening and closing. Clipped wool gathered in small curls. A hand passed over the cloth to locate a rough place. Then the shears returned for another careful stroke. Stretching helped restore shape and dimensions. Cloth could be secured on a frame so that it dried evenly and did not contract into an unwanted form. The familiar expression about being kept on tenterhooks comes from much later terminology, but the principle of tensioning cloth was ancient. A length of fabric, darkened by moisture, was drawn outward and held. As water evaporated, its color lightened. The edges became straighter, and a breeze moved across the broad surface without carrying it away. Some cloth received treatments intended to brighten or whiten it. Ancient texts suggest that sulfur fumes were used by fullers in certain processes, especially for pale wool, though the methods and frequency are difficult to reconstruct in detail. Dyed garments could require different handling. Purple, madder red, yellow, blue, and the many shades produced by combined or weaker dyes represented materials and expense worth protecting. A skilled fuller needed to know when brightness could be restored and when intervention might do more harm than good. Pressing was another possible stage. Archaeological interpretation has connected some workshop equipment with methods of flattening and finishing cloth, while written evidence indicates that polished appearance mattered. We should picture variation rather than a standard machine in every town. A prosperous urban fullery might offer several services, while a smaller establishment did fewer things with simpler tools. The finished result depended on the garment, the customer, and the price agreed. Customers encountered the workshop through bundles, instructions, recognition, and trust. Clothing had to be returned to the correct owner. Marks or labels may have helped identify pieces, and a fuller's reputation mattered in a crowded neighborhood. Roman law contains disputes involving garments entrusted to craftspeople, reminding us that cloth could be valuable enough to generate serious concern. A damaged cloak or misplaced tunic was not a trivial loss when replacement required so many hands and so much time. The fuller occupied an interesting place in Roman urban life. The work could be physically demanding and socially modest, yet fullers also formed associations, sponsored public displays, and participated in civic communities. Inscriptions and electoral notices from Pompeii suggest that people connected with the trade acted collectively in visible ways. Evidence from one city cannot speak for all, but it shows that the workshop was not sealed away from public identity. Its workers belonged to neighborhoods, religious groups, business networks, and the ordinary negotiations of city life. Ownership and labor inside a Follonica could take several forms. A workshop might be operated by an owner, a tenant, freed people, enslaved workers, wage laborers, or some combination that changed over time. Surviving records seldom offer a complete roster. Roman textile production rested within the unequal structures of its society, and it is important to acknowledge this without turning the story into a single simplified arrangement. The same wet floor could hold people with very different degrees of freedom and security. Skill moved through observation and repetition. A new worker learned how deeply to fill a tub, how to turn a heavy fold without tangling it, how long a particular cloth could remain in a solution, and how to recognize the moment when rinsing was complete. Corrections were immediate and practical. An older hand might point to a darker band, draw it toward the light, and demonstrate another pass. The knowledge remained partly in muscles, fingertips, and habits of attention. The workday followed heat and light. In warmer weather, wet cloth dried readily, although strong sun could affect color. In cool or damp conditions, the process took longer. Wind helped and complicated matters at once. Dust from the street could settle on a newly finished surface, so the location of drying space required care. Weather was not background scenery. It was one of the materials of the craft. Domestic care continued alongside professional work. Not every tunic entered a Follonica, and not every household treated cloth in the same way. A lightly worn garment could be aired. An underlayer might be rinsed more often than a heavy outer cloak. Bedding and towels, where households possessed them, followed routines shaped by fiber and access to labor. Some people owned only a narrow selection of clothing and managed it carefully. Wealthier wardrobes created more work even when that work was transferred to servants and tradespeople. Roman garments were also designed in ways that affected care. Many consisted of relatively direct shapes, woven or cut to make efficient use of cloth. Tunics could be belted, pinned, layered, and repaired. Cloaks protected the layers beneath. The toga, worn in specific civic settings by male citizens, required large quantities of wool and careful arrangement, but it was never the universal daily garment imagined by later costume scenes. Maintaining one could be a specialized concern, especially when whiteness and presentation carried public meaning. White cloth was rarely a simple neutral. In political and ceremonial contexts, it could signal status, preparation, or aspiration. Fullers who brightened a garment therefore worked not only on fibers, but on appearance in society. A surface free of dust, evenly finished, and carefully folded changed how the wearer entered a forum, shrine, dinner, or legal proceeding. Laundry and cloth care sat quietly beneath public dignity. At the same time, most garments spent much of their existence in less formal settings. A tunic moved through kitchens, storerooms, workshops, fields, and crowded rooms. A cloak received rain and road dust. Children outgrew clothing, hems frayed, fastenings loosened, and patches accumulated. The life of fabric was long and adaptive. Cleaning was only one part of keeping it useful. Mending often came before or after washing. A tear was easier to inspect when cloth lay flat and clean, though a weak area might need securing before immersion. Thread color did not always match perfectly. A patch could be visible and entirely acceptable on a working garment. Fine clothing demanded subtler repair. Needles, shears, spindles, and small boxes of thread belonged to the same household world as basins and drying lines. By midday, the foolery had become warmer. Sunlight reached farther across the court. One piece of cloth rested on a frame. Another lay folded near the shears, and another was still being rinsed. The sounds overlapped without urgency. Water poured, sandals shifted, blades closed, a wooden tool touched stone. From the street came voices and passing wheels, softened by the workshop wall. A customer arrived with a cloak over one arm. Perhaps it required cleaning after travel, or perhaps the nap had flattened with long use. A worker examined the edge, then the inner surface, then a place near the shoulder where the cloth had taken most of the weather. Terms were discussed. No surviving record preserves this particular exchange, but exchanges like it must have joined craft knowledge to ordinary expectation. The garment moved from one pair of hands to another and entered the patient sequence of care. Elsewhere in the city, a smaller bundle dried in a household courtyard. Linen rested over a rail. Water gathered at the lowest corners, rounded into drops, and fell to the paving below. Someone turned the cloth so that the shaded section received light. Nearby, a tunic waited for a seam to be repaired. The scale was intimate, the techniques less specialized, and the purpose immediate. These two scenes belong to the same history without being identical. The household basin served daily maintenance. The Phalonica joined cleaning to the industrial finishing of wool. Between them lay many arrangements that the evidence only hints at: servants carrying garments to a shop, itinerant workers taking on small tasks, rural households processing cloth close to where fibers were produced, and provincial towns adapting metropolitan techniques to local water and materials. What survives clearly is the patience of the process. Water had to be obtained. Cloth had to be recognized by fiber and condition. Cleaning agents had to be chosen. Pressure had to be repeated. Rinsing had to continue until the material was ready. The surface had to be raised, clipped, stretched, and allowed to dry. Each stage depended on the one before it, and haste could create more work rather than less. Toward evening, finished pieces were taken down. A worker released one fastening, then another, supporting the cloth so that it did not fall against the ground. The wool felt drier, firmer, and more even beneath the palm. It was folded along familiar lines, not sharply enough to strain it, then placed with the garments awaiting collection. The tools were rinsed. Water in a basin settled after the day's movement. The street outside cooled again. A household carried its dry linen indoors, while the last brightness rested on upper walls. Somewhere a chest opened, and a clean tunic was laid beside one that had been carefully patched. The value of the work was quiet. Cloth would return to a shoulder, a bed, a workshop, or a journey, and the cycle of wearing and caring would begin again. One final strip of wool remained on the frame for a few more moments. A mild breeze lifted its edge, then let it fall. Water no longer ran from it, and the workshop sounds faded into the stone around them. There was no hurry at all, only pale cloth, cooling air, and the slow approach of night. There is no hurry at all as we leave the Roman street behind. The stone basins and workshop frames may soften into the distance, while another current of water comes quietly into view. It runs beside a settlement in medieval Europe, beneath alder branches and through a bank worn smooth by feet. The place and century remained deliberately broad, because the routines of washing differed across regions, climates, communities, and long stretches of time. What follows is one gentle composite, made from practices that surviving evidence suggests were familiar in some households, estates, religious communities, and towns. Morning had arrived beneath a sky of thin cloud. The stream reflected pewter light, broken by small ripples around stones. Beyond the bank stood houses of timber, earth, and thatch, with smoke rising slowly from roof openings and chimneys of different forms. A church bell sounded once across the damp fields. Closer to the water, a wooden tub rested on the ground, its staves darkened by use, and folded cloth waited inside a basket covered with a plain linen square. The word medieval contains roughly 1,000 years and an entire continent of distinct places. A wash routine in a late medieval Flemish town was not necessarily the routine of an early medieval farm in northern Italy, a monastery in England, or a household near the Baltic. Materials, water, wealth, legal custom, and season all changed the work. Even within one village, the linens of a prosperous household and the few garments of a poorer neighbor demanded different amounts of labor. The most reliable picture is therefore a collection of possibilities rather than a universal washday. Cloth itself set the first conditions. Linen, made from flax, could become smoother through repeated use and washing. It appeared in undergarments, head coverings, towels, table linen, sheets, and many other forms, though ownership varied greatly. Wool remained central for outer garments, blankets, hose, and woven household textiles. Hemp was also used in some regions. Cotton became more available in parts of Europe through trade and production, especially around the Mediterranean, but it did not occupy the same place everywhere. Linen and wool did not enter the water in the same way. Linen tolerated soaking, rubbing, and alkaline cleaning more readily. White or undyed linen could be boiled or bleached under suitable conditions, particularly in later medieval and early modern routines for which records become more descriptive. Wool could felt, shrink, lose dye, or distort when treated too vigorously. Heavy woolen clothing was often brushed, aired, spot cleaned, or entrusted to specialists rather than repeatedly washed like linen. Before the basket reached the stream, the work might begin beside a hearth. Water was warmed in a pot, although fuel was valuable and boiling large quantities required time. Cloth was sorted by fiber, color, use, and condition. A loose seam might be secured before washing. Stains received attention where they appeared. Fine embroidery and bright dyes demanded restraint. The person directing the work relied less on fixed written instructions than on habits learned through years of watching and helping. Ash from the hearth could become a cleaning resource. When water passed through clean wood ash, it drew out alkaline salts and formed a lye solution. Strength varied with the wood, the ash, the proportions, and the length of contact. Too weak a liquid accomplished little. Too strong a liquid could damage hands and cloth. Experienced workers judged it by appearance, touch, and remembered results, adjusting the mixture rather than following a single recipe shared across Europe. In some recorded routines, linen was arranged in a tub, covered with a cloth, and treated with warm water that had passed through ash. The process later became known in English as bucking, with related methods found elsewhere under different names. Detailed descriptions often come from later centuries, so historians are cautious when carrying every feature backward into the medieval period. Still, the basic use of ash-derived alkali for textile cleaning is well-grounded, and its quiet chemistry belonged to household knowledge long before modern detergents. Soap was also present, but its form, price, ingredients, and frequency of use varied. Some soaps were made from fats and alkaline materials. In Mediterranean regions, vegetable oils supported traditions of firmer soaps that could travel through trade. Elsewhere, softer household soaps might be produced locally or obtained from a craft worker. Soap could be applied to a particular area, worked into a piece of linen, or reserved for tasks where it offered the most benefit. It was not necessarily a neat, identical bar beside every basin. The wooden tub near the stream had already received a first soaking. Its iron hoops were dark with age, and its staves swelled against the water to hold a seal. Coopers who made such vessels were part of the hidden chain behind Washday. So were potters, metal workers, woodcutters, soap makers, spinners, weavers, and the people who maintained paths and water access. A simple basin gathered the labor of many trades before a single cloth was lowered into it. Two people lifted the tub just enough to settle it on firmer ground. The bank could be slippery, and the safest washing places were shaped over time by repeated use. Some communities placed boards, stones, steps, or platforms near water. Town authorities sometimes regulated where washing could occur, especially when streams served multiple purposes. The evidence differs widely, but access to clean flowing water was rarely a matter of walking anywhere one pleased. At the edge, a length of linen was unfolded. The cloth had grown heavier during soaking, and it entered the stream with a soft pull. Clear water moved through it, carrying away loosened material. Hands opened one layer after another. A wooden bat or beetle might be used to press and beat sturdy linen against a board or stone. This was not a frantic motion. It followed a practiced rhythm, lifting, laying, striking, and turning so that water passed through the weave. Laundry bats appear in images and surviving traditions across many parts of Europe, though their shapes and names varied. Some were plain paddles. Others were carved or owned as familiar household tools. Beating helped move water and cleanser through robust cloth, but it was unsuitable for every textile. A fine veil, a knitted piece, or a woolen garment could require gentler handling. Medieval washers did not treat fiber categories as abstract science, yet practical experience made their differences unmistakable. The stream continued around the cloth and past the reeds. A basket stood above the splash line, holding items not yet rinsed. Nearby, a smaller bowl contained soap. No single image tells us who always performed this labor. Women appear frequently in records and art connected with washing, and in many households the burden likely fell heavily on them. Servants and paid washerwomen could take on the work in towns and wealthy homes. Men also worked in textile finishing and in some institutional or commercial settings. Status and household structure mattered as much as gendered expectation. Large establishments turned washing into an organized operation. Monasteries, convents, hospitals, courts, inns, and noble households used linens in quantities that required schedules, storage, accounting, and assigned labor. Rules might specify when garments or bedding were issued and cleaned, although written regulations reveal ideals more readily than daily reality. A religious house could have access to a laundry room, watercourse, drying ground, and workers with defined responsibilities. A smaller community adapted with fewer spaces and simpler equipment. In a courtly household, fine table linen and clothing signaled order and rank. Inventories sometimes list sheets, napery, towels, shirts, and hangings with careful attention to number and quality. Each listed item eventually became wet, heavy, and dependent on hands. The grandeur of a hall rested partly on work performed beside tubs, boilers, streams, and drying fields. Clean white linen appeared effortless only when the labor behind it remained out of sight. For an ordinary rural household, wash frequency was shaped by the number of garments available. A person with several linen underlayers could change and collect them before a larger wash. Someone with very few pieces had to coordinate cleaning with drying and daily need. Outer woolens were preserved through airing, brushing, protection from mud, and occasional specialist care. Aprons, wraps, and removable layers could protect garments beneath them and reduce the need for deep washing. Season changed everything. In winter, water numbed hands. Paths became difficult, and cloth dried slowly indoors. Fuel used to heat wash water competed with cooking and warmth. Summer offered longer light and faster drying, though agricultural work claimed many hours. Spring and autumn brought their own mixtures of rain, wind, and labor. Some households likely gathered larger washes around favorable weather, while small necessary tasks continued whenever they could. The imagined morning by the stream belonged to late spring. Leaves were newly open, and the ground held moisture without deep mud. A faint breeze moved downstream. After rinsing, the linen was twisted carefully between two people or pressed and folded to remove water without straining the weave. Wringing by hand was slow and uneven. The weight diminished with each turn, but the cloth remained cool and dense. Mechanical wringers belonged to much later periods, so medieval water left cloth through arms, gravity, pressure, and time. A piece could be rolled, pressed against a board, or twisted in sections. The method depended on size and strength. A sheet required cooperation. A small cap could be handled alone. The repetitive work rested on shoulders and wrists, and experienced people arranged their movements to save effort across a long morning. Washed linen could be laid on grass to brighten in sun and air. Moisture, light, and repeated wetting helped bleach undyed cloth over time. Later sources describe bleaching greens managed as specialized spaces, but simpler household use of grass and sunlight was also familiar. The effect was gradual rather than miraculous. Cloth might be turned, sprinkled, washed for changing weather, and brought in before evening damp returned. Hedges, bushes, rails, ropes, and purpose-made frames all offered drying surfaces in different contexts. A line stretched between posts is easy to imagine, but not every household possessed the same arrangement. Laying cloth on clean grass spread its weight. Draping it over a hedge allowed air around both sides, though twigs could catch the weave. Indoors, beams and racks helped when weather closed in, while smoke and crowding created other concerns. On this quiet bank, the first rinsed linen was carried to a meadow above the stream. Dew still clung to the grass. The cloth was opened until it formed a pale shape against the green, then its corners were smoothed. Another piece joined it at a little distance. Seen from the path, they resembled patches of low cloud that had settled for the day. Wool waited in the basket. A dark outer garment did not receive the same beating. Dust had already been brushed away while dry. Now a marked edge was treated with a modest amount of soap and cool water. The fabric was supported so it did not stretch. Hands pressed rather than rubbed. The goal was limited, preserving the warmth and shape of the garment while addressing the area that needed care. Specialist cloth workers occupied another branch of this history. Fullers continued to finish woolen fabric in medieval towns, using water, earths, alkaline substances, and mechanical action. In some places, water-powered fulling mills transformed part of the process, allowing wooden hammers driven by a water wheel to pound cloth. Their adoption differed by region and date, and hand fulling remained alongside machinery. These mills belonged chiefly to textile manufacture, not to every household's weekly cleaning. The rise of cloth towns made washing and finishing part of regulated industry. Guild rules, civic ordinances, and merchant standards could govern dimensions, dyes, finishing, and quality. Watercourses carried economic value, and conflicts arose over mills, channels, pollution, and access. A length of wool traveling toward market might pass through hands dedicated to scouring, fulling, raising, shearing, dyeing, and inspection. Household washday and commercial cloth production shared water, but their organization and aims were distinct. Urban washerwomen, where records reveal them, could serve households that lacked space, labor, or convenient water. Payment might be by item, by period, or within a broader service relationship. Their work required collecting, identifying, carrying, cleaning, drying, folding, and returning cloth without confusion. Reputation mattered. A lost shirt or damaged sheet represented real value, and the person who accepted a bundle also accepted responsibility. Laundry lists occasionally surface in accounts, inventories, and legal records, but most washes vanished without written trace. The people who performed them often appear only indirectly through payments or disputes. Art may show women at water, yet images can represent seasons, virtues, biblical scenes, or familiar labor rather than documentary snapshots. Historians piece together tools, words, regulations, fabric remains, and later continuities, always aware that ordinary routines leave faint evidence. The faintness suits the work itself. A washed cloth rarely announced how it had become clean. It simply returned to use. A linen undergarment rested against the skin. A towel hung near a basin. A sheet covered straw, wool, or feather bedding according to the household's means. A tablecloth appeared for a meal. The visible object concealed ash gathered from a hearth, water carried or walked toward, fuel cut, soap obtained, and hours spent turning fabric under a gray sky. Cleanliness in medieval life was not a single scale leading toward modern habits. People recognized fresh linen, stains, odors, vermin, damp, and the comfort of well-kept clothing, but they managed them with the materials and expectations of their own communities. Bathing, laundering, airing, brushing, changing underlayers, and using aromatic plants belonged to overlapping practices. Their frequency and meaning shifted with circumstance. Simple claims that an entire era ignored washing do not fit the surviving evidence. At the same time, waterwork was constrained. A frozen stream could not be wished open. A drought lowered wells and channels. War or displacement interrupted routines. Illness or childbirth altered the labor available in a household. Poverty limited spare cloth and fuel. The history of laundry is therefore not a steady march of improvement, but a record of adaptation to fibers, resources, weather, and unequal access. By late morning, more figures had arrived at the bank. They left space between baskets and greeted one another without stopping the flow of work. News could pass in such places, along with practical knowledge. Someone mentioned that rain might come after noon. Another pointed to a smoother patch of grass farther up the bank. A child carried a small empty bowl, then sat where the ground was dry. The stream turned many separate households briefly toward the same edge. Communal work did not make labor light, but company changed its rhythm. A bat struck cloth, water answered, and a second bat followed farther down. Conversation rose and fell. Silence returned for several minutes. Hands continued even when voices stopped. The sequence was familiar enough to permit thought to wander toward bread in the oven, an animal needing feed, or thread waiting beside a window. Back at the house, The tub needed emptying and cleaning. Ash residue was carried away from the immediate water source where local custom required it. Pots returned to the hearth. Damp floors were swept. The basket that had held soiled linen would receive clean folded pieces only after it too was checked and aired. Laundry extended beyond contact with water into preparation and putting away. Dry linen was not always ironed in the modern sense. Smoothing could be done by hand, by folding under weight, by rubbing with a polished tool, or by other forms of pressing that varied across place and period. Linen presses appear in wealthier settings, while simpler households relied on careful folding. Heated irons existed in forms known from later medieval and early modern Europe, but they were not a universal conclusion to every wash. Starching became important for certain fashions, especially in later centuries, and should not be spread carelessly across the entire medieval period. The same caution applies to bluing, elaborate laundry rooms, and fixed weekly routines that are better documented in early modern sources. Boundaries between eras are porous, and practices emerged gradually. A sleep story can move slowly, but it should not let a familiar later washday drift backward without notice. The linen in the meadow had begun to brighten as cloud thinned. One corner lifted and settled. A person walked between the pieces, testing the upper surface with the back of a hand. The underside remained damp. Each piece was turned so that light and air could reach it evenly. No clock governed the moment. The cloth itself and the changing sky provided the measure. Near the house, a wool cloak hung in shade. Direct heat would have been unkind to it. Water gathered briefly along the lower edge, then disappeared. The cleaned area no longer drew the eye. Once dry, the nap could be brushed into place, the fastening checked, and a worn point at the shoulder reinforced with thread. Mending made washing worthwhile. Linen thinned after long use, especially at folds and places of repeated friction. A damaged shirt could provide patches for another garment. Sheets might be turned, resewn, or cut into smaller household cloths. A fine piece moved downward through uses rather than directly into waste. Eventually, scraps could become stuffing, ties, cleaning cloths, or raw material for paper in regions and periods where rag-based papermaking developed. This long afterlife gave old textiles a soft archive of touch. A hem showed where someone had walked. A patch revealed the shape of a former tear. A faded line remembered a fold. Wash after wash altered the fibers, making linen more supple while gradually thinning it. Care did not freeze an object in perfect condition. It guided the object through change. Storage completed the cycle. Chests kept folded textiles together and offered some protection from damp and pests, though they required attention. Lavender and other aromatic plants are often associated with linen storage, and herbs may indeed have been used in some households, but the evidence does not support placing the same fragrant bundle everywhere. Dryness, cleanliness, and regular inspection mattered more consistently than any romantic scent. By afternoon, the threatened rain had passed elsewhere. Sunlight remained weak but sufficient. The sheets were lifted from the grass and shaken once, creating a soft wave from end to end. They were folded while two people held opposite corners, stepping inward until the long pale surface became a manageable rectangle. Smaller cloths were gathered from a hedge and laid on top. The walk home followed a path pressed between grasses. The basket was still heavy, though lighter than when the cloth had been soaked. Behind it, the stream continued without sign that it had participated in a day of labor. The boards at the bank gleamed. An abandoned drop fell from the end of a washing bat. Alder leaves moved over the current. Inside, the folded linen was placed near warmth, but not too close. Final dampness would leave before the chest was closed. A hand smoothed the upper cloth, following the line of the weave. Supper preparations began in another part of the room. The tasks overlapped as household tasks often did, with no formal ending announced. Beyond the doorway, one narrow piece remained outside. It hung over a simple rail, pale against the darkening field. Evening air passed through it, lifting the fabric only slightly. The stream could still be heard beyond the trees, and the cloth moved once more, then rested as quietly as the fading light. There is no need to hold on to the cool stream or the pale meadow. Let them recede while the path widens, the air grows warmer, and the sound of water changes from a running current to the gentle pour of a vessel in a shaded courtyard. We have entered an Ottoman city, not one exact city on one exact date, but a careful composite drawn from places connected by imperial administration, trade, craft, and travel. Their customs were never identical. The quiet work before us belongs to some households and neighborhoods, not to every home from the Balkans to Arabia, North Africa, Anatolia, and the Eastern Mediterranean. The courtyard was enclosed by walls that held the coolness of the night. A fig tree rose from a square of earth near one corner, and a strip of early light rested along an upper gallery. Water stood in glazed jars beneath an overhang. Folded towels, cotton garments, and household cloth had been sorted on a low wooden surface. Somewhere beyond the gate, a vendor began to arrange goods, and farther away a fountain filled one copper vessel after another with a patient, repeating sound. An Ottoman city could obtain water through a mixture of aqueducts, channels, wells, cisterns, springs, fountains, and private arrangements. The balance changed from city to city and from one neighborhood to another. Istanbul inherited and repaired older systems while adding new works. Cities such as Bursa, Damascus, Aleppo, Cairo, Sarajevo, and Salonika had their own geographies and institutions. A courtyard with convenient water represented one possibility. Many residents still carried water from a public fountain or paid someone to deliver it. Public fountains were both practical structures and acts of patronage. Rulers, officials, wealthy families, and charitable foundations supported the building and maintenance of water points. An inscription might preserve a donor's name, while the true life of the fountain appeared in daily cues, wet stone, filled jars, and the path home. Water for drinking received particular care. Water for washing might come from another source when supply allowed. Household decisions balanced quality, distance, quantity, and effort. The cloth awaiting care also came from many places. Cotton grew and was woven in several regions of the empire and beyond. Linen remained useful for towels, shirts, coverings, and household textiles. Wool served in outer garments, carpets, blankets, and felted objects. Silk moved through luxury production and trade, often combined with other fibers. A single urban household might contain only a modest selection, while an elite inventory could list fabrics from distant workshops in a vocabulary of color, weave, and origin. Each fiber asked for a different kind of attention. Sturdy, undyed cotton or linen could withstand soaking and firm handling. Dyed cotton required awareness of color fastness. Wool could shrink or felt. Silken fabrics enriched with metallic thread demanded restraint, spot treatment, or specialist knowledge. Quilted garments dried slowly. Towels and wraps used in bathing had their own cycle of use: airing, washing, and folding. The person sorting the pile read these differences at a glance. Soap was one part of that knowledge. Ottoman lands included old and varied soap-making traditions. Olive oil soaps were particularly associated with producing regions in the Levant, Western Anatolia, the Aegean, and other areas where oil was available. Aleppo became famous for hard soaps made with olive and laurel oils, though formulas, grades, and markets varied. Elsewhere, soaps could use different vegetable oils or animal fats. Local alkalis, fuel, taxation, guild organization, and trade all shaped what reached a household. It would be misleading to place the same pale bar beside every Ottoman basin. Soap might be hard or soft, locally made or imported, costly or ordinary, fragrant or nearly plain. Some was intended for bodies, some for textiles, and some could serve several purposes. Merchants distinguished quality. Households saved pieces, dissolved them, shaved them into warm water, or rubbed them directly onto sturdy cloth. Surviving account books and regulations reveal commerce more readily than every private gesture. In the courtyard, a small piece of soap rested in a shallow dish. It was firm, muted in color, and slightly irregular at the edge. Warm water had been poured into a basin, and the soap was worked between wet hands until a light film gathered on the surface. No thick cloud of foam appeared. Historical soap did not need to resemble the abundant bubbles of a modern advertisement. Its work took place in the fibers, aided by warmth, water, pressure, and time. A cotton towel entered first. It had been woven with a textured pattern that made it absorbent without great weight. Towels associated with the bath could range from plain household cloths to finely woven pastimals with colored borders and fringed ends. The most elegant examples traveled as gifts and luxury goods. The one in the basin was simpler. Its border was checked for loose threads before the cloth was pressed under water. Bath culture shaped textile care without turning the bathhouse into an all-purpose public laundry. Hammams required a continuing supply of towels, wraps, cloths, fuel, water, and workers. Some textiles belonged to the establishment, while visitors brought or rented items according to local custom and means. Attendants managed cloth as part of a larger service. Household laundry, meanwhile, often remained in homes, courtyards, dedicated workspaces, or the hands of paid washers. The boundaries differed from one city to another. The bathhouse itself linked architecture to routine. Warm rooms, heated surfaces, basins, and flowing water made washing the body a social and material practice. Clean garments and towels extended that practice beyond the building. A freshly laundered wrap, dried in open air and folded along its border, carried the order of preparation into the visit. When it returned, damp from use, it began another small cycle. Household cycles were rarely isolated from the market. Cloth merchants sold new fabric in specialized streets and bazaars. Tailors cut and assembled it. Dyers renewed or transformed color. Embroiderers added patient decoration. Used clothing dealers kept garments circulating. Soap makers and grocers supplied cleaning materials. Launderers, servants, household members, bath attendants, and textile finishers all participated in care, though not in a single standardized chain. In some households, women of the family directed or performed washing. In wealthier homes, enslaved or free servants might carry much of the work. Paid washerwomen served customers in some urban communities. Men appeared in soap making, textile finishing, dyeing, trade, transport, and institutional service, while household roles could cross tidy categories. Rather than assign every basin to one kind of person, the evidence supports a range of arrangements structured by wealth, status, gender, and local custom. The courtyard scene included 3 pairs of hands at different moments. One person sorted and inspected. Another carried water. A third took over the rinsing while bread was checked in a nearby room. Their exact legal and family relationships remain undefined, as they often do in the records. What can be seen is the coordination. Washing occupied space among cooking, childcare, mending, shopping, worship, and the reception of visitors. It was a task with stages, pauses, and returns. The towel was lifted from the soapy water and pressed along its length. A carved wooden board might assist sturdy pieces in some contexts, while other cloth was rubbed against itself or kneaded in a basin. Tools differed. The motion here was simple: fold, press, unfold, turn. Water darkened the cotton, making the woven border appear more saturated. The fringe floated briefly, then settled. Rinsing required more water than the first basin suggested. A jar was tilted, and a clear arc struck the cloth. The basin filled. Hands moved the towel slowly until the water held the loosened soap. Then the cloth was lifted and the basin emptied. Repetition mattered. Soap left within the weave could stiffen or mark it, so rinsing continued until touch and appearance indicated that enough had gone. Carrying water placed a practical limit on every stage. A private well or cistern altered the calculation, but did not remove the labor of drawing and moving. Public fountain access added distance and waiting. Water carriers made a living in many Ottoman cities, delivering filled skins or vessels to customers, although their role and equipment varied. Purchasing water transferred the journey without making it disappear. The second item was a plain cotton shirt. Its cut belonged to a layered system of dress in which garments near the skin helped protect more elaborate outer clothing. Terms and styles changed across languages, communities, ranks, and centuries. A loose shirt might be made from cotton or linen, sometimes with fine stitching at an opening. Washing such an underlayer more readily than a heavy coat preserved the coat and made everyday care manageable. The shirt was turned inside out. Cuffs, collar edges, and the places most often touched received a little extra soap. There was no need for harshness. Cloth represented spun fiber, weaving time, purchase, tailoring, and repeated repair. Even when a fabric was ordinary, careless rubbing shortened its useful life. The practiced hand sought the point where cleaning was sufficient and wear remained minimal. Outer garments waited elsewhere. A wool coat could be brushed and aired. A silk caftan or richly patterned robe might be protected by layers beneath and treated only where necessary. Specialist cleaning and refinishing were available in major centers, but access depended on wealth and place. Fine garments stored in elite households appear in detailed probate inventories, their descriptions preserving color and material long after the individual routine of care has vanished. Color deserved special patience. Ottoman textile culture delighted in reds, blues, greens, yellows, purples, whites, and complex patterned combinations. Dyes came from plants, insects, minerals used in mordanting, and layered processes guarded by craft experience. A bright color could fade in strong sun or bleed in unsuitable water. The washer tested, separated, and chose shade or light accordingly. A dark-dyed piece did not join pale towels merely for convenience. White cloth had its own expectations. Brightness could be encouraged through washing, sunlight, and repeated care, though methods varied. Fine white turbans, shirts, towels, and household linens carried meanings of neatness, readiness, and rank in different contexts. Starch was used for some textiles and garments, especially where a particular crisp shape was desired. It was one tool among many, not a universal finish for every folded item. Laundry could also connect with scent. Soap itself left a mild trace. Rose water, fragrant woods, herbs, incense, and floral preparations appeared in Ottoman domestic and ceremonial life, particularly among households able to purchase them. Yet it would be too easy to perfume every courtyard in imagination. Many clean textiles smelled primarily of water, fiber, air, and plain soap. Fragrance, when used, was an addition shaped by availability and preference. The first towel was ready to dry. Rather than twist its fringe tightly, two people pressed water from the center toward the ends. The cloth was shaken once, opening into a broad rectangle. It was then carried to a line where sunlight reached for part of the morning. The border was arranged so its weight hung evenly, and the fringe was separated with a few passes of the fingers. Drawing lines transformed the courtyard. Cloth created temporary walls of pale cotton and linen, softening views and dividing sun from shade. Air moved differently between them. A child passing through had to choose a path around a low-hanging towel. The fig leaves cast small shifting shadows on a sheet. From an upper window, another household's fabric could be seen spread across a rail. Not every urban home possessed a generous private court. Dense neighborhoods included rooms above shops, shared houses, narrow alleys, and buildings organized around common spaces. Residents used roofs, balconies, interior lines, courtyards, and any suitable clean area allowed by custom. Privacy, modesty, weather, smoke, dust, and theft all affected placement. The serene courtyard represents one arrangement among many, made possible by architecture and resources. Roofs offered sun and moving air, especially in warmer seasons. They were also places for sleeping, food preparation, social life, repair, and storage in different regions and households. Laundry joined this crowded geography. A sheet laid across a clean rail had to be secured against sudden wind. Dark cloth might be kept from the strongest light. Dry pieces were collected before evening moisture settled. Climate varied across the empire, from rainy Balkan valleys to Anatolian plateaus, Mediterranean coasts, and the heat of Arab provinces. Winter washing in Sarajevo did not resemble summer washing in Cairo. In colder districts, indoor drying and fuel became pressing concerns. In dry heat, cloth could lose moisture quickly but collect dust. Coastal humidity slowed the final stage. A composite story must let each place keep its weather rather than placing the same mild morning everywhere. The courtyard chosen for this night's journey belonged to late spring in a temperate city of western Anatolia. Rain had fallen 2 days before, leaving the cistern supplied and the roof tiles clean. The morning promised warmth without hard heat. This setting is plausible rather than documented as one particular household. It provides room to see the work while leaving historical certainty where it belongs. Beyond the gate, the market street became active. A soap seller uncovered blocks and wrapped portions according to a customer's request. Weight, quality, and price mattered. Soap production could be taxed and regulated, and in famous centers it supported workshops with large boiling cauldrons, storage areas, molds, cutting floors, and trade networks. The finished bars traveled in bales and crates, their quiet destination often a household basin. Making hard olive oil soap required combining oil with an alkaline solution, heating and managing the mixture, allowing it to set, cutting it, and curing it over time. Exact recipes belonged to local practice. Laurel oil and alpine soap added cost and character in varying proportions. In Palestinian cities such as Nablus, olive oil soap became an important industry under Ottoman rule, with production tied to surrounding groves, family firms, and regional commerce. Other towns maintained their own methods and ingredients. The soap in the courtyard carried no visible account of this journey. It simply grew smoother at the corners as it was used. Yet within it lay harvested fruit, pressed oil, ash, or another alkaline source, fuel, workshop heat, curing time, merchant credit, transport, and retail exchange. Laundry drew a long economic landscape into the palm of a hand. Textiles carried landscapes too. Cotton linked fields to gins, spindles, looms, dyers, and markets. Wool linked flocks and pasture to shearing, washing, carding, spinning, weaving, and fulling. Silk linked mulberry cultivation and silkworm tending to specialized reeling and weaving. Linen began with flax and the demanding work of preparing its fibers. To wash cloth was to preserve the outcome of these distant, layered tasks. Preservation often included repair. Once the cotton shirt had dried enough to inspect, a thinning place near the side seam became visible. It was set aside for a small patch. Thread from an earlier sewing project would serve. The patch did not need to disappear completely beneath perfect stitches. It needed to lie flat, support the weakened weave, and allow the garment to continue its daily work. In a tailor's shop, repair could be more specialized. Garments were resized, relined, turned, and altered as bodies and fashions changed. Valuable fabrics might be removed from one item and incorporated into another. Clothing passed through inheritance, gift, sale, and charitable distribution. Used clothing markets extended circulation. Cleanliness made these transitions easier, but value came from material, workmanship, condition, and social meaning together. Household inventories reveal textiles in motion only after they have become still on a page. A robe is counted, a quilt valued, several cushions grouped, towels listed, shirts described. The names vary by language and court practice. The labor of washing is usually absent, yet every item with a continuing household life required some combination of airing, dusting, brushing, washing, mending, refilling, or covering. Care is the invisible verb behind the inventory noun. Larger residences created larger systems. Palaces and elite households employed people responsible for wardrobes, linens, baths, kitchens, bedding, and cleaning, with duties divided through hierarchy. Supplies were purchased and recorded. Fine garments might be entrusted only to particular attendants. Towels and sheets moved in batches. Even here, no single plan covered every residence or century, and administrative records describe organization more clearly than the physical feeling of the work. At midday, the courtyard entered full light. The earliest towel was nearly dry. Its weave felt warm on the sunward side and cooler where layers overlapped. It was turned, not because a written schedule demanded it, but because touch indicated the remaining damp. The shirt beside it moved at the sleeves. A sheet cast a rectangle of shade on the paving stones. Folding began with the smallest pieces. A cloth was brought down, shaken lightly, and laid across the low surface. Corners met, borders aligned, fingers smoothed rather than pressed sharply. Some textiles might later be ironed or pressed, and heated irons of several forms were known in Ottoman contexts, especially in urban and professional work. Their ownership and use were not universal, and many everyday pieces were simply dried carefully, hand-smoothed, folded, and stored. Storage could involve chests, cupboards, shelves, bundles, and cloth covers. Cedar or other aromatic woods offered scent and some practical benefit in certain settings. Camphor and fragrant substances appear in trade and elite household practice. Plain households relied on dryness, wrapping, and inspection. Fine textiles were protected from dust and light. Bedding was aired. Seasonal clothing waited until weather called it back into use. The last folded towel retained a faint scent of soap. It was neither exotic nor strong. The smell stayed close to the fibers and blended with sun-warmed cotton. The stack grew slowly, one rectangle set over another, fringed ends arranged so they would not tangle. A hand rested briefly on top, feeling that the inner layers were fully dry. Afternoon activity moved away from the basin. Water remaining there was used where suitable rather than discarded without thought. The dish was rinsed. The piece of soap returned to a dry ledge. The courtyard floor, splashed during the morning, darkened in irregular patches and then lightened as air passed over it. From the market came a softer murmur as heat settled over the street. A door closed against glare. Under the gallery, the folded cloth remained cool. The person repairing the shirt guided a needle through the patch, drawing thread until it rested flat, then making the next small stitch at nearly the same distance. By evening, the drying line was empty. For a few hours it had held the visible record of the household's cloth, pale towels, plain shirts, a colored wrap kept mostly in shade, and a narrow embroidered piece handled with particular care. Now only the line remained, casting a thin shadow across plaster. The courtyard returned to its earlier shape. Jars stood beneath the overhang. The basin rested upside down so no water remained inside. Fig leaves moved in the cooling air. Behind a shutter, clean cloth lay in a chest, ready for the bath. The table, the bed, the street, and the ordinary repetitions of another day. Night arrived without erasing the mild trace of soap. It lingered close to the low wooden surface and among the folds put carefully away. The fountain beyond the gate continued its even pour, and the courtyard became still enough to hold the sound. Cloth, water, and patient hands had left only this quiet scent behind. Indigo in an Edo morning. There is no hurry at all as we leave the quiet courtyard behind and travel eastward, toward another city and another morning shaped by water, cloth, and patient hands. The light is still pale over Edo, the great city that would later be called Tokyo, and the roofs of its closely set houses seem to float in a soft gray air. Along a narrow lane, wooden shutters have begun to slide open. A bucket rests beside a shared well. Somewhere beyond the houses, a vendor calls in a voice too distant to make out, and a broom moves slowly across packed earth. Above the lane, lengths of cloth hang from poles and lines, not yet bright in the early light, but already showing the deep, familiar blue of indigo. This is a composite morning rather than a record of one particular household. Edo was large, varied, and constantly changing during the Tokugawa period, which lasted from the early 17th century into the second half of the 19th. Customs differed between neighborhoods, occupations, regions, and levels of wealth. Surviving images and written records tend to preserve some lives more clearly than others. Still, the evidence allows us to follow the broad rhythms of clothing care in an urban world where fabric was valuable, repair was ordinary, and washing was only one part of keeping a garment useful. The lane belongs to a district of modest townhouses. Some dwellings faced the street as shops, with living and work spaces behind them. Others stood in longer rows of rented rooms, often described as nagaya, gathered around shared facilities. In many such settings, water had to be carried. Edo possessed an impressive network of waterworks, yet neighborhood distribution still involved wells, cisterns, carriers, buckets, and repeated journeys. Every basin represented weight moved by hand. At one doorway, a wooden tub has been set where the light can reach it. The tub is broad enough for cloth to be pressed and turned, but it is not a modern washing basin with measured markings and a drain. Nearby lie a shallow pail, a dipper, a small brush, and a bar or portion of cleaning material whose exact composition could differ. Soap in the modern household sense was not always the central substance. People used water, alkaline preparations, plant ash in some settings, rice bran in some kinds of cleaning, and other materials suited to a particular textile and stain. Records do not support one universal recipe for every home. The first pieces brought out are simple cotton cloths. Cotton had become increasingly common in Japan during the early modern centuries, though its spread was not instant or equal everywhere. By the 18th and 19th centuries, cotton textiles were deeply woven into the clothing and household life of many townspeople. Cotton could be softer against the body than some coarser fibers, and it accepted indigo dye especially well. It could also be patched, recut, handed down, and eventually used for smaller household purposes. A length of cotton often lived several lives before its fibers were finally too tired for further use. One cloth is a tenugui, a narrow towel with many possible duties. It might dry hands, cover the head, wrap a small object, or serve in work. Another is part of a light garment worn in warm weather. There may be underlayers, work clothes, and household cloths as well. They are not all treated together. Color, fiber, condition, and purpose matter. The deeper blue pieces are kept apart from pale cloth, particularly when there is a chance that dye may release into the water. A worn seam receives attention before vigorous washing can pull it farther apart. The woman kneeling beside the tub is not meant to stand for every person who did this labor. Laundry and clothing care were often strongly associated with women within households, but men also handled cloth in professional workshops, dye houses, laundries, shops, military households, and institutions. Servants, apprentices, relatives, and hired specialists might take different parts of the work. A family arrangement could change with age, income, illness, season, or the demands of a trade. The calm figure at the tub is one thread in a much larger fabric of labor. She lowers the first cotton piece into cool water. It darkens at once, not because it has become newly dyed, but because wet fibers reflect the morning differently. Her hands press it beneath the surface. The water makes a small hollow sound against the staves of the tub. Cloth moves under her palms, folds over itself, and is lifted just enough to let water run back in narrow streams. There is no rapid beat, only a repeated sequence of wetting, pressing, turning, and examining. Some washing might be done close to the dwelling, especially when water could be carried from a neighborhood source. In other circumstances, people used riverbanks, canals, washing places, or platforms by water, where local access and regulation permitted. Edo was threaded by rivers and waterways, but they served many purposes, and not every bank was equally clean, convenient, or available. The city was also vulnerable to changes in weather and water level. A quiet household tub therefore belongs beside, rather than instead of, the broader geography of urban water. The blue cloth in her hands carries the history of another craft. Indigo dyeing in Japan had long roots, and its importance grew with the expansion of cotton. The dyestuff usually associated with Japanese indigo came from plants processed through skilled, time-consuming work. Farmers, merchants, makers of fermented indigo material, and dyers all stood behind the color now resting in the tub. A household might own many blue things without ever preparing a dye vat. The dyer's workshop and the washing place were connected by cloth, but their tasks were not interchangeable. In a dye house, The blue emerged through repeated work. Cloth or yarn might be dipped into a carefully maintained vat, lifted into air, allowed to oxidize, and dipped again until the desired depth was reached. The chemistry was understood through practice long before it was described in modern laboratory terms. Temperature, fermentation, timing, and the condition of the vat all required judgment. Surviving accounts suggest that experienced dyers read the surface, smell, and behavior of a vat with a familiarity built over years. The workshop could be called a kanya or koya in some contexts, though names, arrangements, and specializations varied. Edo supported many textile trades because its population demanded cloth, uniforms, shop curtains, bedding covers, towels, and garments of numerous kinds. Some artisans dyed new material. Others refreshed faded cloth, applied patterns, removed marks, or handled related finishing work. A customer might bring fabric directly, work through a cloth merchant, or rely on an established neighborhood relationship. The chain from fiber to finished garment could pass through many hands. Indigo had practical and aesthetic appeal. Its many shades could range from a light, softened blue to tones so deep that they approached the color of night. It suited bold patterns and quiet solids. It became strongly associated with ordinary urban dress, although no color belonged to only one class or occupation. Regulations on display and luxury changed over time and were applied unevenly. Townspeople often found subtle ways to express taste through fabric quality, pattern, lining, and combinations of restrained colors. A seemingly modest blue garment could still carry careful choices. Back in the lane, the cloth is lifted from the tub and held above the water. It is not twisted carelessly. Pressure must remove enough water for the next step without straining the weave. A second basin waits for rinsing. Water is precious as labor even when it is not scarce in the landscape, because each fresh portion must be obtained, carried, and later emptied. The washer watches the clarity of the water and decides whether another rinse is useful. Such decisions rarely entered official chronicles, yet they shaped the time and effort of an ordinary day. Not every garment was simply plunged whole into a tub. A kimono was constructed from relatively straight lengths of cloth, and this construction allowed a thorough method of care often known as arihari. In this process, a garment could be carefully unstitched into panels, washed, stretched, or laid to restore the cloth shape, and then sewn again. The method preserved the value and form of the textile, but it required time and skill. It might be done within a capable household or entrusted, in whole or in part, to specialists. The unpicking itself was quiet work. Threads were cut and drawn away without damaging the fabric. Sleeves, body panels, collars, and other sections returned to something closer to the long rectangular pieces from which the garment had first been made. Once washed, the damp panels could be smoothed and dried under tension. Some methods used boards, while others used supports that held the cloth in shape. Terms and techniques differed, and the surviving record is clearer for some periods and businesses than for others. The essential idea was conservation through disassembly. This approach made sense in a culture of careful textile reuse. A fine garment was not necessarily discarded when its size, fashion, or owner changed. It could be altered, turned, lined again, or remade for another person. An adult garment might yield cloth for a child. Worn sections could become patches. Later, fragments might serve as ties, covers, cleaning cloths, or padding. The progression was not identical in every home, but the value of cloth encouraged an attentiveness that modern wardrobes can easily conceal. Repair often came before washing and again after drying. A loose edge was secured. A thin place was reinforced from behind. The color of a patch might match closely, or it might remain visible as a record of use. Rural traditions of heavily layered and stitched cloth are sometimes used to represent all Japanese mending. But urban Edo contained many approaches, from discreet repairs on respectable dress to sturdy visible patches on workwear. The common principle was that sound cloth still had work left in it. The morning has brightened enough for the blue to separate into shades. A deeply dyed jacket hangs beside a faded towel. One has the dense color of a shaded pond, while the other is nearly the blue of smoke. Fading could be accepted, managed, or corrected. Re-dyeing extended the life of some textiles, though the decision depended on cost, quality, and intended use. A piece sent back into a professional dyeing cycle carried old wear beneath new color, like a road covered by fresh snow while its shape remained. There were also specialists in cleaning and stain treatment. Their exact services and titles shifted over the long Edo period. Some worked closely with dyers because removing a mark, restoring a color, and refinishing cloth could overlap. A valuable garment presented a different problem from a common towel. One stain might respond to water, another to careful brushing, another to a preparation known through craft experience. Good work was often the art of doing enough without doing harm. The household washer did not need to understand every secret of the professional shop. She knew her own things in a different way. She knew which hem had weakened, which cloth released blue into rinse water, which child's garment had been let out at the seam, and which towel must be ready before the midday work began. This knowledge was intimate, repetitive, and rarely written down. It lived in the sequence of the hands and in the arrangement of objects near the tub. Across the lane, another resident carries a pole or tray of damp cloth toward a better drying place. Dense urban housing did not always provide a private garden or broad yard. People used eaves, railings, shared courtyards, roof spaces were safe and permitted, and lines stretched where air and light could find them. Prints from the period sometimes show cloth and garments as part of the ordinary city view, hanging beside signs, plants, tools, and domestic architecture. Drying laundry became a small moving layer in the streetscape. The season changed the method. In humid weather, cloth dried slowly and needed spacing. In winter, hands felt the cold water more sharply. Rain could force a hurried gathering from the line or postpone a larger wash. Edo's summer heat made light cotton welcome, while seasonal changes in clothing involved storage, airing, and inspection as well as washing. People protected garments from damp and insects with practices that varied according to household means and inherited custom. Bedding and heavier household textiles created their own calendar. Futon covers and other removable layers could be washed, aired, mended, or renewed. The filled bedding itself demanded different care from an ordinary cloth. On a clear day, bedding might be placed where sunlight and air could reach it. This was not simply a matter of cleanliness. It restored loft, dispersed dampness, and made the evening sleeping place feel orderly again. The work of laundry extended into the work of making rest possible. That work was tied to commerce. Cotton reached Edo through networks of farming, spinning, weaving, dyeing, transport, wholesale markets, and neighborhood shops. Used clothing dealers gave garments another route through the city. Second-hand clothing was important because new cloth could be costly and because garments retained value. A robe sold by one household might be cleaned, repaired, altered, and worn by someone else. The life of the textile continued without preserving the names of most of the people who tended it. Fire was another quiet presence. Warm or heated water was useful for some cleaning, but fuel cost time and money. Charcoal and firewood served cooking and heating as well as laundry-related tasks. In the close-built city, fire also demanded caution. Large-scale boiling was not the automatic center of every Japanese wash in the way it became associated with some European washday routines. Materials, stains, seasons, and resources guided what was warmed and what remained cool. The cleaned pieces now return to air. The woman gives one cloth a firm, controlled shake, and it opens with a low flap. She smooths its corners before placing it across a bamboo pole. Another length is clipped or tied in a manner secure enough for the breeze. The scene is practical rather than ceremonial. Yet the arrangement has its own calm geometry, with straight poles, rectangular cloth, vertical walls, and the repeated folds of roofs beyond. Freshly washed cotton does not finish itself. Once dry, garments may need smoothing, folding, stitching, or reassembly. Pressing practices did not simply mirror the heavy irons familiar in later Western households. Cloth could be stretched, smoothed by hand, placed on boards, beaten or finished according to textile and technique, and cared for by specialists where needed. The aim was not always a sharply pressed crease. Often it was an even panel, a settled seam, and a surface ready to be folded. Folding carried practical knowledge of garment construction. A kimono's straight sections could be aligned into a compact rectangle, protecting its shape and making efficient use of storage. Papers, chests, baskets, and wrapping cloths helped organize possessions, depending on means. Cedar chests and fine storage belonged to some homes, while modest households used simpler containers and limited space. Order was adapted to what a dwelling allowed. The lane is fully awake now, though it remains gentle from our distance. A shop curtain is raised. A delivery passes at the far end. Someone draws water, and the pulley or bucket gives a brief wooden knock. The blue cloth above the doorway has begun to stir as warmer air moves between the buildings. Its surface is uneven where old creases have softened, and one patch catches the light more readily than the rest. If we followed that cloth backward, we would not find a single story. We would find a cotton field in one region, spinners and weavers in another, merchants, boatmen, warehouse workers, cutters, dyers, stitchers, sellers, wearers, washers, and menders. Some parts of that route are documented. Others survive only as likely patterns. The cloth gathered labor as it gathered color. Laundry did not erase that history. It allowed the object to continue carrying it. If we followed the water, its route would be equally broad. It moved through springs, channels, aqueducts, wells, wooden pipes, buckets, tubs, gutters, and canals. Edo's water systems were achievements of planning and maintenance, but daily access still depended on neighborhood arrangements and human effort. A pail lifted before breakfast connected domestic routine to the engineering of the city. The connection remained mostly quiet because it worked through repetition. The professional dyer, meanwhile, may already be tending a vat. In the dim workshop, the surface is checked, the mixture stirred, and prepared cloth lowered carefully. When the material rises, its color changes in contact with the air. This transformation can seem magical when watched for the first time, but for the artisan, it is measured work. Each dipping is followed by waiting. Each length is handled with attention to evenness. The morning advances by increments of blue. Indigo sometimes receives stories that make it sound like a single symbol for all of Japan. It is better to let it remain a material with many histories. Its use differed by region and period, and other dyes remained important. Within Edo, a laborer's faded work garment, a shop curtain, and a merchant's restrained robe belonged to different settings. Their shared blue did not make their lives the same. In the household, difference appears in small decisions. A good garment is not washed today because airing is enough. A work cloth receives a stronger rubbing at one edge. A delicate piece is set aside for someone with greater skill. A towel is rinsed one more time. A seam is left to dry before it is repaired. History often preserves decrees, disasters, and famous names, while the continuity of ordinary life rested on choices of this quiet scale. The labor was repetitive, but repetition did not mean carelessness. Familiar tasks can create a precise awareness of change. The washer felt when cotton had softened, when a fold still held grit, when rinse water had cleared, and when a worn thread was close to breaking. The dyer saw whether color had taken evenly. The stitcher knew how much tension a seam could bear. Skill settled into the hands until motion and judgment became almost the same thing. As noon approaches, the lane will grow busier. The damp pieces will slowly lose their weight. Shadows from the eaves will draw back and then lengthen again. Some cloth will be folded before evening. Some may remain under cover until the next fair interval. A garment taken apart for Arihari will wait through several stages before it can be worn again. Laundry, like so much household work, does not always end at a single moment. For now, we stay with the earliest part of the day. Water remains in the bottom of the tub, clouded by the work it has done. The wooden dipper rests across the rim. Hands have been dried on a cloth that will itself be washed another time. Above, a row of blue rectangles moves with the smallest breath of air, each one held between the pull of gravity and the lift of the morning. There is no need to follow the lane any farther. The sounds of the city can soften behind the roofs, until only the faint movement of fabric remains. A narrow strip of indigo hangs beneath the eaves, dark at its folded edge and lighter where the sun begins to pass through. It sways once, settles, and waits in the quiet early light. The Victorian Washhouse. There is no hurry at all as the indigo cloth fades from view and another morning gathers around us. We arrive in the 19th century, in a British town where brick walls hold the cool air of dawn and a thin line of light rests along the roofs. Somewhere a factory whistle may sound later, and carts will pass over the road. But for now, the most persistent noise comes from water being poured into a vessel. A metal pail meets a stone floor with a muted ring. A fire has been encouraged into life, and above it a copper begins the long process of warming. The word Victorian covers more than 60 years, from 1837 to 1901, and it contains several generations of change. It also describes a reign, not a single way of living. Laundry in a country cottage differed from laundry in a London lodging. A wealthy household with several servants followed a different routine from a family renting 1 or 2 rooms. Scottish, Welsh, English, and Irish practices had regional forms, and the wider British Empire contained still more histories that cannot be folded into one washhouse. Our setting is therefore a composite British town, built from practices that surviving evidence suggests were common in some 19th century communities. The room might be a washhouse attached to a dwelling, a shared space in a yard, or a purpose-built public facility. Each possibility changes the work. In a private washhouse, the family controlled the schedule but bore the costs of fuel, water, and equipment. In a shared yard, neighbors negotiated access to a pump, line, copper, or drain. In a public washhouse, customers paid small fees to use designated places for washing, boiling, rinsing, and drying. None of these arrangements became universal. and many people worked with whatever could be fitted into a kitchen or scullery. This morning, the copper dominates the room. It is a large vessel set over a fire, often built into brickwork, though size and design varied. Water is carried into it by bucket in houses without a direct supply. The filling itself takes many journeys. A lid may help it heat. The fire needs tending, and fuel needs to have been bought, gathered, stored, and kept dry. Before a single sheet is washed, the room has already absorbed labor from other days. Laundry was often organized as a weekly event, commonly associated with Monday in parts of Britain, but this pattern was never absolute. Weather, water supply, employment, household size, religious observance, and access to drying space could shift the day. Some families washed smaller items more frequently. Some saved heavy household linen for less frequent large washes. Those able to send work to a laundress followed a different rhythm, while professional laundries and institutional washhouses arranged tasks around larger quantities. Preparation often began before washday itself. Clothes and household linens were sorted by color, fabric, and condition. Tiers might be mended before washing so that agitation did not enlarge them. Particularly soiled places could be soaked or rubbed with soap. White cottons and linens might be separated from dyed garments, woolens, flannels, and delicate items. The phrase washing the clothes conceals a series of judgments, because heat and vigorous handling that helped one fabric could shrink, fade, or distort another. On a table rests a block of soap. Commercial soap became increasingly available during the 19th century as manufacturing and distribution expanded, though quality and price varied. In Britain, the repeal of the soap tax in 1853 removed one burden from production and sale, but it did not instantly place identical soap in every home. Some households bought named brands as advertising grew. Others used cheaper forms, saved scraps, or made cleaning preparations according to local knowledge. Washing soda and other alkaline materials also became familiar, used with care because strong solutions could affect skin and fabric. The soap is cut or rubbed rather than poured from a bright bottle. A portion may be dissolved in hot water. Its scent is plain, mingling with coal smoke, damp cotton, wood, and warm metal. Steam begins to collect near the copper. Condensation forms on the cooler window, turning the town beyond into a soft gray shape. The washer opens the lid, checks the water, and steps back from the first warm cloud. She might be the woman of the household, a relative, a servant, or a laundress paid by the piece or by the day. In many records, washing appears as women's work, and the burden fell heavily on women across social classes, though their relationship to the task differed. Men manufactured equipment, delivered water and coal, worked in commercial laundries, operated machinery, and sometimes washed in domestic or institutional settings. Children and other household members might assist, but our story does not need to make their labor its center. The essential point is that the work was distributed through class, occupation, and family arrangements. The first load is not a mixed heap. White household linen suited to hot treatment is handled separately. Pieces are soaked, soaped, and moved through stages. Some may be placed in the copper to boil or simmer, a practice associated particularly with sturdy white cottons and linens. Boiling could loosen dirt and support whitening, but it was not suitable for everything. Wool and many colored fabrics needed gentler temperatures and less agitation. Experienced washers learned these differences through instruction and repetition. A wooden implement called a dolly, passier, peggy, or by another local name could help move cloth through water. Designs varied. Some had a perforated bell shape, some a short stool-like base, and some simple prongs. The user lifted and pressed it rhythmically, driving water through the fabric. Elsewhere, clothes were stirred with a stick, rubbed by hand, or worked in a tub with a different device. Household technology rarely arrived as one clean succession in which every old tool vanished at once. Beside the tub is a washboard. Corrugated metal washboards became more common during the 19th century, while earlier and alternative boards used wood or other surfaces. The washer lays a section of cloth against it and rubs where attention is needed. The movement is steady, not frantic. Too much force can wear fibers, especially at cuffs, collars, and hems already weakened by use. Soap gathers in a pale line, and water drips from the lower edge back into the tub. The sequence continues from soaking to washing, then from washing to rinsing. Rinsed water must be reasonably fresh, which means more filling, lifting, pouring, and emptying. In a house supplied by a pump or street source, every change of water has a physical distance attached to it. In homes connected to newer piped systems, access may be easier, but pressure, hours of service, charges, and plumbing arrangements vary. Municipal water improvements altered domestic work gradually and unevenly. The growth of towns made water and washing public concerns as well as private ones. Reformers, local authorities, philanthropists, engineers, and residents debated baths, washhouses, drainage, and supply. The Baths and Washhouses Act of 1846 allowed local authorities in England and Wales to establish public facilities, with related developments following, but permission did not create a washhouse in every town. Some municipalities built substantial institutions. Others delayed, declined, or produced services used only by part of the population. A public washhouse could offer a row of compartments, each with tubs and access to hot and cold water. Larger sites might include coppers, mechanical wringers, drying rooms, and attendants who maintained order and equipment. Fees were intended to be modest, yet even a small payment mattered to a tight household budget. Distance mattered too. Carrying a bundle of wet or dry laundry through city streets was work in itself. Opening hours and rules had to fit the user's other obligations. Inside such a building, the sound was different from the private room. Water ran into several tubs. Wood and metal knocked softly. Voices rose and fell beneath a high ceiling. Steam gathered above rows of bent shoulders, then moved toward vents and windows. The place offered equipment and water, but it was also a social room where people exchanged news, advice, complaints, and ordinary conversation. Surviving descriptions vary, and no single atmosphere can represent them all. Some users found relief in the facilities, while others found them inconvenient or insufficient. Our washer remains in the smaller room. She lifts a rinsed sheet from the tub. Wet linen is surprisingly heavy, and its weight shifts without warning as water moves through the folds. She gathers it close, places it into another vessel, and prepares it for wringing. Two people can twist a large sheet between them, each holding an end, but this requires space and coordination. A mechanical wringer or mangle changes the motion, sending the cloth between rollers that press water out. Mangles had long histories, and 19th century versions ranged from heavy box mangles to more compact roller machines. A hand-cranked wringer could reduce the strain of twisting, although it still required feeding, turning, and careful adjustment. It also cost money and occupied space. A comfortable household, commercial laundry, or public washhouse was more likely to possess substantial equipment than a poor tenant. Advertising often presented new devices as if they had transformed domestic life at once, while actual adoption unfolded in layers. The rollers turn with a low creak. The sheet enters thick and wet, then emerges flattened, leaving a narrow stream below. Buttons, hooks, and thick seams need attention. Some garments cannot pass through without damage. The machine does not make decisions, separate fabrics, carry water, tend the fire, or hang the load. It changes one demanding motion into another arrangement of work. After wringing comes the open air, if the weather permits. A yard behind the houses contains posts and lines. In a crowded district, drying space may be shared or limited to a short line between walls. In rural settings, hedges, grass, frames, and broader yards offer other possibilities, though weather remains in command. Rain can suspend the entire plan. Soot and smoke from town industry can settle on clean cloth. A patch of sun is welcomed without being guaranteed. The first sheet is carried out in a basket and lifted to the line. Wooden pegs secure it. The fabric opens like a pale wall and briefly blocks the view of the neighboring roof. Then the breeze fills it, and it moves away from the bricks. Smaller pieces follow, placed so air can pass between them. The line sags slightly under the weight. Drops darken the ground beneath. White fabric sometimes received additional treatments. Bluing, using a small amount of blue color to counter a yellowish cast, became a familiar laundry practice. Starch could give collars, cuffs, shirts, aprons, and household textiles a desired firmness or finish. Recipes, products, and preferences varied. These steps added more dissolving, dipping, wringing, drying, and later ironing. The finished appearance of respectable clothing depended upon labor that was easily overlooked once the garment was worn. Ironing created a second landscape of heat. Flat irons were heated near a fire or stove, tested, wiped, and exchanged as they cooled. Some designs held hot material inside, while others were solid metal. A scorch could undo hours of work, so temperature was judged with care. The iron moved across dampened cloth, smoothing one section while the next waited folded nearby. In summer the room could become oppressive, though we keep our attention on the quieter sounds, the slide of metal, the fold of linen, and the soft contact with the board. Different garments demanded different finishing. Pleats, gathers, lace, embroidery, and shaped pieces slowed the work. Men's shirts with detachable collars, women's dresses with complex construction, servants' uniforms, children's clothes, bedding, towels, and undergarments did not all pass through the same simple process. Some pieces were sent to specialists. Fine laundresses developed reputations for whitening, starching, and finishing particular items. Skill mattered because fabric could be costly and appearance could affect employment and social standing. Professional laundry work expanded in towns. A laundress might take bundles into her home, employ relatives or assistants, and return the finished pieces on an agreed day. Larger laundries organized workers into stages, sometimes introducing steam power and specialized machinery later in the century. Hotels, hospitals, schools, military establishments, and wealthy houses generated large quantities. Records reveal businesses of very different scales, from one woman serving a few clients to mechanized premises handling institutional loads. The growth of machinery did not produce a simple story of effortless progress. Washing machines were patented and advertised throughout the century, using drums, paddles, rockers, plungers, or other mechanisms. Some worked well for certain loads. Some were too expensive, cumbersome, or rough on clothes. Many still required water to be carried and heated separately. A machine could save one kind of exertion while adding maintenance, cleaning, and setup. Household budgets and housing conditions decided more than novelty alone. Commercial soap followed a similar uneven path. Industrial production, branded packaging, and mass advertising made certain products more visible. Manufacturers promoted purity, economy, whiteness, and modernity. Yet a printed advertisement describes an aspiration as much as a daily fact. A household might ration soap, combine it with soda, choose a local maker, or rely on customary methods. The history of laundry lies in the distance between the polished promise and the worn tub. Clothing itself was changing. Industrial spinning and weaving increased the availability of cotton textiles, while ready-made garments gained ground in some markets. More cloth in circulation could mean more items to wash, not simply less work. Expectations of freshness and presentation also shifted. A clean white collar or apron carried social meaning. Employers, schools, institutions, and neighbors could judge appearance without seeing the hours spent producing it. The work also fit within a crowded domestic schedule. Fires were needed for meals. Infants, older relatives, customers, and lodgers required attention. Paid employment might continue around the wash. A domestic servant followed the timetable of the house that employed her. A laundress working for customers handled deadlines and uncertain payment. The familiar image of Monday Washday is useful only when it leaves room for these overlapping demands. At midday, the washhouse floor is wet in patches. The copper fire has settled lower, though another load may still be waiting. Soap fragments rest in a dish. The dolly leans against the wall. On the window, steam has formed a clear trail where one drop traveled downward. Beyond the glass, the hanging sheet brightens as the clouds thin. One garment remains in the basket because its color is uncertain. It may run in hot water. Another is wool and needs a gentle wash to avoid felting. A lace edge is too delicate for the board. A sturdy towel can endure stronger rubbing. These choices show the washer's expertise more clearly than any single tool. A room full of equipment is useful only when someone understands fabric. The tools themselves carry traces of manufacture. The wooden tub came from a cooper or factory. The iron rollers passed through foundry and workshop. Coal was mined, transported, and sold. Soap relied on fats or oils, alkalis, processing, packaging, and distribution. Cotton connected British laundry to global systems of cultivation and trade, including histories of coercion and empire that extended far beyond the washhouse. We can acknowledge that broad connection without turning this quiet chapter into a complete account of industrial Britain. Within the room, the immediate concern is smaller. The next rinse water is clear enough. The wringer has been adjusted. A loosened peg on the line has been replaced. Work advances through such modest corrections. The washer does not experience the 19th century as an era label. She experiences warm metal, damp sleeves, a stiff handle, a draft beneath the door, and the gradual reduction of the pile. By late afternoon, dry pieces are brought inside. They have the cool feel of outdoor air. Some are ready to fold. Others wait for ironing, starching, mending, or return to a customer. The empty basket never remains empty for long. Clothes move back toward bodies and beds, and then, through use, they begin the cycle again. The public washhouse, where one exists, is closing or shifting toward its evening routine. Tubs are emptied and surfaces rinsed. The last bundles are gathered. Steam thins beneath the roof. Outside, users separate into different streets, carrying the results of their labor home. The building remains as one 19th century answer to the problem of limited domestic water and space, useful to many, absent to many more. In the private room, the fire is allowed to fall. Ash settles beneath the grate. The copper holds only a little warm water. A final cloth hangs over a chair near, but not too near, the remaining heat. The day's noise has become a sequence of smaller sounds. A bucket set down, a board wiped, a latch closed. The window is still misted at the edges. Through its center, the pale sheet on the line can be seen moving against the dusk. Then the last steam loosens from the glass and disappears into the cooling room. The pain clears slowly, and the wash house grows quiet. The quiet machine. There is no hurry at all as the last steam leaves the Victorian window. We move forward by a few decades, slowly enough that no single year has to carry the whole weight of change. The brick washhouse gives way to a modest kitchen or utility room in the early 20th century. Outside, the sky is still dark. Inside, an electric lamp casts a small circle of light over a tiled floor. A machine stands near a sink, solid, enameled, and not yet silent. A hose curves toward a tap. Beside it, a basket of cotton waits. The machine looks like a beginning when viewed from our own time, but it belonged to a long middle period. Washing machines had existed in many hand-powered forms before electric motors entered the home. Early electric models appeared in the first decades of the 20th century, and one machine marketed as the Thor in the United States in 1908 is often named in histories of the appliance. Such landmarks are useful, though invention did not equal immediate ownership. Most families did not wake the next morning to find their tubs replaced. Electricity itself arrived unevenly. Urban districts were generally connected earlier than many rural places, while national and regional patterns differed greatly. Even where wires passed along a street, a household might not have enough outlets, reliable service, or income for a large appliance. Plumbing followed another uneven map. A washer was far more convenient when water could be drawn and drained nearby. Without that support, buckets and hoses preserved much of the carrying work that older tubs had required. Our room is therefore not every room. It might belong to a fairly comfortable household in an American or Northern European town sometime between the world wars, though details vary across countries. The machine has a tub in which water and clothes are moved by a powered mechanism. It is not yet the sealed automatic appliance familiar later in the century. Water may need to be added at the right temperature. Soap must be measured. The cycle must be watched. Wet fabric still has to pass through rollers. The washer turns a switch. The motor begins with a low hum and a small vibration that travels through the floor. Inside the tub, water moves through cotton sheets. The motion is more regular than a dolly pressed by hand, but the room has not become empty of work. The load was sorted before it entered. Stains were noticed. Pockets were checked. Colored pieces were held back. The person beside the machine knows that the promise of automation is always shaped by what must happen before and after the motor runs. Early powered washers used different mechanisms. Some rocked or rotated a tub. Some moved an agitator through the water. Others relied on arrangements inherited from hand-powered designs. Manufacturers experimented with wood, copper, galvanized metal, enameled steel, gears, belts, and lids. A model that appeared modern in 1 year could look cumbersome a decade later. Advertising emphasized speed and relief from drudgery, while repair manuals and household guides revealed the continuing need for adjustment. The electric motor removed a large amount of repeated muscular motion, especially during agitation. Yet water could still be heated separately. Soap or washing powder might have to be dissolved. Each batch might pass through wash water, one or more rinses, and a wringer. The wringer's rollers pressed water from the cloth, saving the strain of twisting but requiring steady attention. The damp pieces then went to a line, drying rack, or, In some commercial settings, a separate drying machine. The word machine can make a process sound self-contained. In practice, the appliance sat inside a network. Power stations generated electricity. Utilities built lines and meters. Plumbers laid pipes. Factories stamped metal and wound motors. Shops offered credit, delivery, and demonstrations. Repairers kept belts and switches working. Soap manufacturers reformulated products. Municipal systems supplied water and carried it away. The household switch connected all of these distant forms of labor to one room. For families without a private washer, other arrangements remained important. Hand laundry continued at home. A relative or paid laundress might take in work. Commercial laundries collected bundles. Apartment buildings sometimes provided shared facilities. Self-service laundries, which developed in the United States during the 1930s and spread in varying forms, placed rows of machines in a public room. The later name laundromat became widely familiar, though establishments and terminology differed by place. A self-service laundry created another kind of waiting. Clothes turned inside metal drums while customers sat on benches, read newspapers, watched children, or looked through a window at the street. Coins or tokens marked the cost of each load. The space reduced the need to own a machine, but reaching it required transport and time. For some, it was a welcome convenience. For others, it was another task fitted between paid work and household obligations. Commercial laundries were more mechanized still. Large washers, extractors, mangles, presses, and dryers handled the linen of hotels, hospitals, restaurants, ships, factories, and private customers. Workers sorted, marked, loaded, unloaded, finished, folded, and packed. Machines increased capacity without making human judgment unnecessary. A scorched sheet, mixed color, torn seam, or missing bundle remained a practical problem no matter how impressive the equipment. At home, laundry labor continued to be described as women's responsibility in much advertising and household advice. Images of cheerful wives beside gleaming appliances sold not only machines, but a model of domestic life. The message suggested that modern equipment would make housework light, satisfying, and almost invisible. Historical studies have often noted a more complicated result. Appliances could reduce particular strains while expectations rose and standards changed. Clothes might be washed more frequently because washing became easier. Households could own more garments as mass production expanded. White shirts, school clothes, work uniforms, towels, bedding, and an increasing range of washable fabrics filled the basket. The weekly mountain could become several smaller loads. Time saved at the tub might be absorbed by sorting, ironing, folding, shopping, caregiving, or paid employment. Technology altered the shape of labor without guaranteeing its equal division. Men participated in laundry in many settings, especially in commercial plants, military service, bachelor households, institutions, and particular family arrangements. Over the century, domestic roles changed, but not at one pace. Wartime mobilization, migration, new employment patterns, housing design, advertising, and social movements all affected who did the wash. It is safer to describe tendencies than to declare a universal household. The basket did not read the rules printed around it. The materials in the basket were changing too. Cotton remained important, joined by rayon and later by a growing range of synthetic fibers. Each promised or required different care. Wool could shrink. Rayon could weaken when wet, depending on its type and finish. Nylon and polyester introduced other possibilities. Labels gradually carried more standardized instructions, but early users learned through advice, experience, and occasional disappointment. The machine had to meet the fabric halfway. Soap also changed. Traditional soaps could react with minerals and hard water and leave deposits. During the 20th century, synthetic detergents were developed and expanded, especially from the 1930s and 1940s onward. Their adoption differed by market and household. Later formulations were designed for particular machines, temperatures, and fabrics. Boxes and bottles offered measured modernity, but the familiar problem remained the same: to loosen what did not belong while preserving the cloth. Some products added whiteners, enzymes, softeners, fragrances, or controlled amounts of bleach. Each innovation arrived with claims of ease and better results. Not every claim was accepted, and not every ingredient proved benign in every context. Water pollution, packaging, energy use, and chemical exposure gradually became part of the public discussion. The history of a quiet machine extends outward into rivers and factories just as surely as older washing extended toward wells and streams. In our early room, those later debates are still distant. The washer has reached the end of its agitation. The motor stops, and for a moment the absence of vibration feels like a new sound. A lever releases water. The operator prepares a rinse, checking a hose and watching the level rise. She has learned the machine's temperament, the slight pause before the motor catches, the amount a sheet can tangle, and the load that is too heavy for an even movement. Ownership required this kind of intimacy. Appliances were durable goods, expected to serve for years. Instruction booklets explained oiling, cleaning, hose connections, wringer pressure, and electrical precautions. Local repair shops could replace a belt or motor brush. Family members shared advice. A machine acquired scratches, small stains, and a characteristic hum. Its age became part of the household calendar. After the Second World War, automatic washing machines became more common in affluent markets, particularly in North America, though adoption patterns varied. These machines filled, washed, drained, and spun with less direct intervention. Front-loading and top-loading traditions developed differently across regions. In Britain and much of Europe, smaller homes, energy costs, plumbing arrangements, and manufacturer choices contributed to paths distinct from those in the United States. No single machine represents the century. The automatic cycle changed attention. Instead of standing beside the tub for every stage, the user could leave the room. A bell or the sudden quiet announced completion. Yet the machine still needed loading, detergent, settings, unloading, and care. Clothes went onward to a line, a rack, or an electric or gas dryer. Delicates might still be washed by hand. Stains still required inspection. A broken pump could stop the entire domestic system. Drying machines also spread unevenly. In places with sufficient space and favorable weather, the outdoor line remained economical and familiar. In dense apartments, rainy climates, and households pressed for time, powered drying offered another convenience. Some homes used a wringer washer for decades after automatic models appeared. Others moved directly from hand washing to shared automatic machines. Generations of technology overlapped in streets, towns, and even within one extended family. The design of houses began to make room for the appliance. A basement corner, kitchen recess, bathroom connection, utility room, or dedicated laundry room each expressed different assumptions about space. Architects and builders planned water inlets, drains, and power. In some apartment blocks, a communal laundry room gathered neighbors at scheduled times. In others, compact machines were fitted into individual flats. The placement of the washer showed whether laundry was expected to remain visible, hidden, shared, or private. The machine also reorganized time. Older wash routines could occupy a named day because setup was extensive. Automatic washing allowed a load to begin in the morning, evening, or between other tasks. Washday became less distinct in many households, though not everywhere. The sound of a machine could enter daily life as background, beginning after breakfast, during a quiet afternoon, or late at night when electricity rates and schedules made that convenient. This flexibility carried its own gentle pressure. If washing could be done at any time, it could always be waiting. A basket in the corner became a visible measure of unfinished work. Families negotiated who noticed it, who sorted it, who remembered a needed uniform, and who moved the damp load before it soured. The physical task had become lighter, but the mental sequence remained distributed unevenly. Clothing manufacturers responded to machine washing. Fabrics and finishes were promoted as washable, color-fast, drip-dry, easy care, permanent press, or wrinkle-resistant. Some claims proved more durable than others. Garment construction, dyes, buttons, zippers, elastic, and seams all had to survive repeated cycles. Care labels increasingly translated textile science into household symbols and temperatures. A small tag became a compact agreement between factory and machine. Ironing changed as well. Synthetic blends and permanent press treatments reduced it for some garments. Electric irons offered thermostatic control and, later, steam. Yet shirts, table linens, uniforms, and personal preferences kept ironing boards in use. A saved hour in washing did not erase every finishing task. Folding remained resistant to full automation, a quiet geometry still performed by hands. The folded result linked the 20th century home to every earlier chapter of our night. A sheet was aligned at its corners, halved and halved again. A towel was smoothed. A shirt was turned so that sleeves lay flat. These motions would have been recognizable in a Roman household, beside a medieval stream, within an Ottoman courtyard, or under the eaves of Edo. Even when the garment shapes and meanings differed, machines transformed the route to the folded pile, not the desire to keep cloth useful. Water connects the chapters even more clearly. The Roman fuller worked with basins and specialized finishing. The medieval washer chose a place by stream or tub. The Ottoman household measured water through the courtyard. Edo residents carried it from neighborhood supplies. The Victorian washer filled the copper one bucket at a time. The automatic machine concealed much of this movement inside pipes, valves, and drains. Concealment can feel like disappearance. Turn a dial, and clean water enters without being seen on its journey. It arrives under pressure, mixes with detergent, carries heat into fabric, and leaves through a hose. The user may never know the reservoir, river, treatment plant, pumping station, or sewer beyond the wall. The work of infrastructure becomes most visible when it fails. That hidden flow came with environmental cost. Heating water used energy. Large volumes moved through households. Detergents entered wastewater. Fibers loosened from clothing, including synthetic fibers later recognized as persistent pollutants. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, manufacturers and users increasingly discussed efficient machines, cooler cycles, concentrated detergents, and line drying. The old constraints of water and fuel returned in new language. Efficiency standards and machine designs improved in many markets, though performance, affordability, and durability remained debated. Front-loading machines often used less water than older top-loading designs, while cycle length, maintenance, and purchase price shaped decisions. Cold water detergents reduced the need for heat in some loads. Sensors adjusted water levels. Digital displays estimated time, sometimes optimistically. The machine grew quieter and more complex at once. Public self-service laundries remained essential for people without stable housing arrangements, private machines, suitable plumbing, or enough space. Students, renters, travelers, Migrant workers and families with unusually large items continued to share rows of drums. The scene had changed from the 19th century public washhouse, but not completely. People still carried bundles through the street and waited while water and motion did their work. In some parts of the world, hand washing and semi-automatic machines remained common far into the century and beyond. A twin-tub machine might wash in one compartment and spin in another, requiring the user to transfer each load. Water could be saved and reused according to local practice. Elsewhere, a basin and line remained more practical than an appliance. Global sales figures can hide the ingenuity of households adapting to unreliable power, limited supply, and different textile customs. The story of the washing machine is therefore not a staircase on which every household climbs the same steps. It is a wide landscape of overlapping methods. One family inherits a wringer washer and keeps it running. Another visits a laundrette each week. Another buys a compact automatic machine. Another washes delicate garments by hand beside a machine used for everything else. Progress, when it comes, is experienced through local water, wages, housing, and time. Return now to the modest room before dawn. The rinse is complete. The wringer turns, and a sheet emerges flattened between the rollers. It falls into a waiting basket with a soft, wet weight. The operator guides the final edge through, switches off the motor, and releases the pressure. The machine's hum ends. Water ticks through the drain. Outside, the first light has begun to separate the window from the wall. The sheet is carried to a sheltered line. Cold air meets the damp cotton. 2 corners are fixed, then 2 more, and the cloth opens toward the pale sky. It is cleaner, but it also carries the ordinary signs of its life: a mended edge, a faint crease, and one place where the weave has thinned. Years pass gently around that image. The enameled washer gives way to a rounded post-war model, then to a square automatic machine with printed settings, then to a quiet modern appliance behind a closed door. The line remains in some yards. In others, a dryer turns. Detergent changes from shaved soap to powder, from powder to liquid, from liquid to a small measured dose. The basket changes material, but its shape remains familiar. We do not need to decide that the newest room is the best or the oldest one more authentic. Each contains labor, resources, skill, and compromise. The earlier washer carried water and knew the behavior of fire. The later washer reads labels, chooses cycles, treats stains, maintains filters, and manages time. Both depend on systems beyond the room. Both want the cloth to return to use. The quietest modern machine can run almost unnoticed. Its drum turns one way, pauses, and turns the other. Water lifts the fabric and lets it fall. There is a low pulse, then stillness, then another measured movement. Behind the glass, a sleeve drifts past like a pale ribbon in a dark pool. Before the household wakes, the cycle enters its final minutes. The machine balances the load and gathers speed. The sound settles into an even note rather than a clatter. Pipes hold their hidden water. Folded towels wait in a cupboard. On a chair lies a blue cloth, its color recalling the Edo Morning, while a white sheet recalls the Victorian line, and the woolen fabric of Rome rests much farther back in the night. The movement slows. The remaining water leaves. A small light goes dark. For a few moments, nothing in the room moves at all. The machine has not ended the history of laundry. It has become one more vessel in that history, another way of bringing water to cloth and setting patient hands around the beginning and the end. Beyond the window, dawn rests lightly on the roofs. Inside, the drum is still, the pipes are quiet, and the clean fabric waits in the dark. The long path of water has folded into this peaceful room, and there is nowhere else we need to go. Thank you for spending the night in history with me. I'm the yawning historian. Good night.